Thanks. Good evening. Welcome to the public meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We are always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation. Law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We hope our meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community. Thank you for attending.
As required under the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 1046 et sequentia, adequate notice was given for calling this meeting. It was authorized by the Board of Education and forwarded to the municipal clerk, Princeton Packet, and the Trenton Times on January 9, 2025. It was also distributed to the schools and others on the standard distribution list. The board reserves the right to enter into executive session during all meetings of the Board of Education. Board Policy 168, recording devices, requires that we inform those attending this in-person meeting that the proceedings are being recorded. This meeting is being live streamed. The representative of the sending district is authorized to vote on such matters that affect sending district students or affect the governance of the Princeton Public Schools, as more specifically designated in NJSA 18A 38.8.1. Sending district votes pertaining to personnel actions refer to high school, central administrative, and district-wide staff only. Votes otherwise are considered as abstentions. In the event the statute is amended, the law should take precedence over this bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. Oh, would you like to call the roll?
Yes. Daphne Kendall?
Here.
Beth Barron?
Here.
Adam Bierman?
Here.
Debbie Braunfeld?
Here.
Mara Franceschi?
Here.
Eleanor Hubbard?
Here.
Susan Cantor?
Here.
Ari Mizell?
Here.
Chris Santarpio?
Here.
Catherine Lara?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. All right, welcome to this meeting. It's our budget workshop, and we're also going to have our school ethics, governance, and role of a board member training. Before we begin, I just did want to thank the voters for passing our referendum, all three questions. On behalf of the children that we educate, we thank you for that. And so moving on now, we have Mr. LaPura from Fogarty and Hara, who will provide our annual ethics training.
Okay, thank you very much. So this year I'm going to do more of an update. Last year I did a presentation that was a little bit lengthy. I know that's a big shock to all of you that work with me because normally I'm just terse and right to the point, right? So you don't all have to laugh. That's okay. No, it's fine. So this time I'm going to do it a little bit shorter, just updating, again, for the benefit of the new board members and for the public, reviewing the School Ethics Act, what it entails, what we need to do, and then an update on recent cases or advisory opinions that have come up within the last, I guess within the last calendar year, technically. Let's see. All right, whenever we go to so I'm not controlling it, but Matt is. And so when we go to the next slide, I think there's, oh yeah, go to slideshow, Matt. Yeah. Right there, yeah.
There we go.
Perfect. All right. So the first part is about the powers and duties of the board. So if we go to the next slide, what we will see is,
Oh, God.
for those of you who are, oh yeah, you like the little
Yes.
the cube spinning around there. That's great. So you are all members of the Board of Education. You sit on this governmental entity that is authorized to run the school district. Your powers and duties all come from the statute, the statutes that generally apply to this. You have to enforce the rules of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Obviously, everything that you do has to be lawful and in accordance with New Jersey law. And you're tasked with making, amending, and repealing rules for the government and management of the schools and their employees. That's the broad picture of what we're doing. So if we go to the next slide, we can see, so that's what boards of education are. What do they do? It's a common misconception sometimes with members of the public that we see about what the board does. And what I would summarize it as, I mean, there are specific things that you can do, but generally speaking, the board's role is policymaking, planning, and appraisal. The board doesn't run the school district. It makes sure that the school district is well run. And we'll talk more about that. But things that you do that you have to do, approve curriculum that meets the New Jersey student learning standards. You adopt a budget every year. You hire certain necessary certified personnel and non-certified personnel that educate or support the district students. and develop policies for the management of the school district. And as it says up there, none of those things are things that the board does alone. It's going to act upon recommendations of the superintendent of schools, or the way I put it up there, as if we were Irish, like the Lucky Charms guy, the recommendation, oh, the superintendent of schools. Somehow that didn't get caught on the proofreading, but it's glaring to me. Okay, so anyway, so when do boards act? When you're here at a meeting, right? When you have a meeting that's been convened in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, you've got to have a quorum. The board does have, like many boards, most boards do, you have committees. Those committees will come up with ideas and recommendations for the full board, but they don't act on their own in terms of actually taking action. They may do a number of things to get information in front of the board that the board is then going to vote on, but the committees themselves do not dictate policy. They make recommendations, and the board acts as a whole, as an entire entity. One thing that I always caution people about is that from time to time, there will be emails that will be sent to all the board members, totally fine and appropriate. But you might see sometimes, please do not reply all to this email or things of that nature. The reason is because even though we've never seen a case that says this, but board attorneys have been saying this for 20 plus years, in theory, if people are going back and forth, exchanging information, replying all, it's kind of like having a meeting at some point. So we need to be careful that we don't do that, because then that would be a meeting not in view of the public. That wouldn't be permitted. But so long, getting information out to all the board members, totally appropriate. Board member has a question for the superintendent or another one, a single individual email, fine. Everyone going back and forth for 10 minutes at a time, no, that's a meeting. So at least in theory. Again, we talked about operating as a unit, right? The board acts as a whole. The majority rules at the end of the day. If the board votes on something and that's the board's policy or that's the board's decision on a particular thing, regardless of how an individual member voted, that's the board's position, and that ultimately we have to support. Typically in meetings, the board president, to make sure that we have just kind of one person who potentially responds to the public or articulates a consistent position, will be the person who interacts with the public. But can they request other people do that? Sure. And of course, that's separate and apart from the administrative staff, your superintendent, your BA, who will also speak to the public. So if we go to the next slide, so we talked about when the board act, then we have the board and the administration. And what's important is, and we highlighted this before a little bit, it's to not to administer the schools, but to see that they're well run. That specifically comes from the school board member code of ethics, which we will talk about as we go along here. Your bylaw 146 specifically says no board member by virtue of their office shall exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the operation of the school district, or as an individual command the services of any school district employees. So that's an important thing. A lot of times members of the public figure like, well, you're on the board, you can now get this accomplished. Well, not really, because the board makes decisions. I don't make decisions as a board member. You do have to comply with the visitor policy, right? They might think, well, you're a board member, you can just go wherever you want. No, that bylaw specifically talks about it. And for members of the public, and I think the board members all know this, but the superintendent is basically your CEO, who administers the district, does all of the things that need to get done from an operational standpoint, personnel recommendations. Your business administrators, like your CFO, takes care of the budget, oversees maintenance, so forth and so on. So those are the people primarily who are going to be running the district, if you will. Now, in terms of the relationship, I mean, this is not really an issue that we have here, but the board administration relationship is supposed to be cooperative, not adversarial. Mike is going to appreciate that I'm saying that, right? So in any event, we share concerns with the administration when they come up, right? We don't want to have any surprises. We don't want to have something come up that you know about that's going to come up at a board meeting. And that, that's the way that we should handle it. If you get a complaint about whether it's about a teacher or about a staff member or some policy or whatever it is, not only does the School Ethics Act require you to do this, but also your bylaw says that if you have a community complaint, your job is not to say, oh, I'll take care of that. Actually, you should not say that. You should say, I will refer this to the superintendent, and the superintendent will get back to you, or someone lower on the chain of command as appropriate will get back to you. But you're not the person that's going to fix the problem. You're the person that can say, I know who to give this to, and that's what I'm going to do. Because otherwise, then it really becomes like administration of the school district, which we're not supposed to do. In terms of the code of ethics, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail, but you do have to support district staff and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. So can you take deliberate action that undermines, opposes, or compromises or harms school personnel as they're performing their duties? Not unless you want to violate the School Ethics Act. You can't do that. So that's not appropriate. We have to support personnel when they are properly performing their duties. Does that mean that you have to agree with everything the superintendent says? While we like that, right, most of the time, no. If the superintendent proposes something and the board votes on it, you can absolutely vote no if you like. But in general, in terms of supporting the superintendent in the performance of his or her duties, yes, that is something that needs to be done. And you don't want to talk about things in public that could potentially undermine or compromise the superintendent's ability to do his or her job. So that's pretty much straight from the School Ethics Act. In terms of the board as an entity, we kind of already talked about this, that board members individually have no supervisory authority. Everything flows from the board as an entity. So if we move to the next slide, what we'll see in terms of confidentiality, I think you probably all know this, but just in case you don't, there is an obligation to preserve the information that you learn as a member of the Board of Ed. The School Ethics Act does have something about this as well, but the expectation really has to be, imagine that you just can't tell anybody anything that you learn in closed session. Basically, you can't tell anybody. You can't tell your spouse, you can't tell your kids, none of that. You might know a teacher who is having employment action taken against them. Can't tell your friends, spouse, kids, anybody about that. And particularly personnel matters, student matters, negotiations, those types of things are exempt from discussion in public with limited exceptions. And they are discussed in executive session or closed session. And it's kind of like Las Vegas. What happens in executive session stays in executive session. So that's the way that has to go. And there is a specific provision in the School Ethics Act that says you have to keep matters confidential. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So this, because it's new this year, so this expectation exists regardless of the impact the matter has on the board's members, own children, or friends. Could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, you might have a scenario in which you know of, not that this is happening here, but just a hypothetical, you could know that there may be a teacher that is going to be disciplined or non-renewed, or there could be some issue relating to a staff member, and maybe your kid is in that class, or maybe your friend's kid is in that class, or it might be a significant issue that happened. And people might want to know, oh, I haven't seen that teacher for a week. What's going on with that teacher? Is that person coming back? And we can't say anything about that because their privacy rights are paramount. We don't want to violate their privacy rights because we don't want to do it in general, but also we don't want to get sued, right? As your lawyer, I don't want you to be sued. I want you to stay on the straight and narrow. So we don't want to reveal any information that could give rise to a potential lawsuit. And of course, the School Ethics Act requires that. So yeah, it doesn't, like, even if you feel like, boy, I wish they knew this, or, the public is killing us about this personnel decision, but they don't know all these things behind it. Yeah, well, we just have to live with that. We can't tell anybody, not that that's ever happened here, but we just can't tell anybody what the background story is. So now the Code of Ethics, we talked about it a little bit, but, and very briefly, it's about almost 25 years old now. It was enacted in 2001 to make sure that the public has the assurances that people are not acting in their own interest, or they're not on the board for the inappropriate reasons. They're there to do what they're supposed to do, which is to ensure that the district is well run. If board members violate the School Ethics Act, which includes the Code of Ethics, but there's also a provision that talks about a number of prohibited acts that board members cannot take, there could be a filing with the School Ethics Commission, and then, any individual can file a complaint alleging that a board member has violated the Code of Ethics or the School Ethics Act in general. If that happens, what could happen to the board member? You could be publicly reprimanded by the School Ethics Commission, censured, which is, you actually have to read that at a board meeting that the board member was censured, suspended. There's at least one case, if not two, from this year where a board member was suspended for a period of time, and it has happened that board members have been removed. So depending upon the nature of the violation, how severe it is, it could have serious consequences. Your bylaw talks about what those prohibited acts are. It talks about the Code of Ethics. The real distinction is just that it depends upon if a complaint is filed against you as a board member, if it's a violation of the code of ethics and a person files that, they have to prosecute that themselves. If it's an alleged violation of the Prohibited Acts section, a deputy attorney general is going to be handling that case and prosecuting that case against the board member. So that's a significant distinction. But otherwise, there's still limitations on what board members can and can't do. So this is the code of ethics I'm going to read. I know that typically we've read them, but I'll just do that for you. I'll just read them out. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind. A, I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. And what I always kind of say about that one is sometimes there are things that various individuals in the state or federal government enact that we don't like. If we don't like them, we still have to abide by those rules. You know, we try to get them changed, you lobby, you do whatever you have to do, but we can't say, well, we're just ignoring these rules. B, I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and will seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of all children, regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. Straightforward, of course, we do that. C, I will confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, and I will help to frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. Now, that doesn't mean that you talk to every single student or every single parent, but just generally speaking, discussing new policies that you're going to adopt at board meetings, that is part of that consultation process, right? The public has the ability to comment on those, to give you their thoughts, but we don't want to just do things without giving thought to how is this going to impact these various stakeholders. D is I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see that they are well run. C and D see a lot of action when it comes to the School Ethics Act and the complaints that are filed, because sometimes in different school districts, some board members forget about that and they have complaints filed against them. E is also another one that sees a lot of action. I will recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education and will make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board. Where we see that one come up a lot is with letters to the editor or Facebook posts or things like that that might potentially compromise the board. They don't always do that, and there are disclaimers that people can use, but that's where you see that a lot. The other 5 are going to be that I refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups, or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends. Definitely a couple of cases that deal with that this year, where people forgot about that, unfortunately. G, I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which if disclosed would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I'll provide accurate information in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its school. So the first part of G, self-explanatory. The second part, I think, also generally self-explanatory, but I can tell you that there was a case couple of years ago, I think it was the Lodi Board of Education, there was a member who was suspended for 6 months because he had his own personal, I don't know, blog or whatever, some kind of web page. And he said all sorts of information about the association president who was a teacher in the school district, various other people, and the information was not accurate. And it was probably defamatory, quite frankly. So he had to step off from the board for 6 months. He was put in the penalty box. So H, I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the chief administrative officer. And one thing that I will say about that yes, that's required as part of the School Ethics Act. The other thing too is, and I think most of you know this, but to the extent we have new board members or members of the public who may be watching, you all get to hire one person. It's the superintendent. Technically, you vote on the recommendations that are made by the superintendent. In fact, you can't even say, well, I'd like to hire this person. Well, if the superintendent doesn't say, yeah, I agree, we're going to hire this person. If the superintendent doesn't make that recommendation, you're not hiring that person. So that's also for the public to know. You know, sometimes they think, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you hire this person? Or I put my resume in. The superintendent does the hiring. You vote on it. And you can vote no. That's not a problem. But that's the way that it goes. I will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. We know that. And J, we talked about this before too. I will refer all complaints to the chief administrative officer and will act on complaints at public meetings only. That's a big thing. Only after failure of an administrative solution. So every time you get a complaint from a constituent, I mean, you're all volunteering your time and you all want to help people. That's why you do what you do. But when they give you a complaint, you have to say, okay, I refer it to the person who's going to handle it. I can't handle it myself. All right. So then if we go to the next slide, then when we talk about, I mean, I kind of summarized some of these things already, but again, superintendent makes the recommendation. We can't, I guess one thing I would say is I said, you can vote no on these things. You can't vote no for arbitrary and capricious reasons, right? You can't say like, I'm just going to throw, you know, like a dart at a dartboard. And if it comes on an even number, I'm going to vote yes on this. And if it's an odd number, I'm going to vote no. No, you can't do that. That violates the School Ethics Act. But if you have a valid reason why you believe that you shouldn't appoint someone, yes, you can vote no, not a problem. In terms of hiring, I think we'll see this like a little bit later in a different slide. The School Ethics Commission has given advisory opinions about like what the board members' process is in terms of the hiring process. And from my recollection here, you do it exactly the way that they say, which is to the extent that you have any board members who sit in on candidate interviews for like administrative positions, it's an advisory role to the superintendent. You're not running the interview. You're not doing the interview. You're there to kind of just give some feedback, and that's fine. It's never been an issue. But in some places, they want it to be really like some board members want it to be like right on top of that, and be part of the interview process. And the answer to that is no. You hired a superintendent to do all that work. Let them do it. So that's that part of it. Then if we look at public advisory opinions, so I made this reference to advisory opinions, and some of you know about it and some of you don't, but if there is a question about whether or not I, as a board member, can take any type of action, or am I going to run afoul of the School Ethics Act, you can request an advisory opinion. Typically, what happens is it'll usually go, I mean, what my experience is in most districts is usually goes through the lawyer. They ask the lawyer, what do you think about this? Sometimes we have a very clear answer and we say, well, if you do that, I know you're going to have a problem, because there are cases that talk about that. Other times it's nuanced and we say, well, I can give you some advice on this, but if you really want to know, you should probably ask for an advisory opinion. So that's what happens. They make some of these advisory opinions public. Not all of them are public. Some of the ones that are public that came out this year. Can a board member participate in negotiations if they have an aunt employed in the school district, but is not a member of the local union? So in this case, it was someone who was, if I recall, an administrative assistant, maybe to the director of special services or some position like that. Not part of a union. I guess the district maybe is a little bit smaller. So none of the administrative assistants were part of any union. The answer, though, was no. And you might think, well, why? I mean, we think of those cases like if I have a relative or a spouse who's right in the district, I understand I can't vote on that. That seems like it's a pretty direct conflict. But what they said here is that essentially, if you're participating in negotiations for the teacher's contract, for example, right, can the administrative assistants then turn around and try to use that and say, well, we think we should get benefits that are similar to what the teachers got, right? Yes. So the thought process is that members of the public might look at that and say, oh, well, so-and-so is participating in the teacher negotiations, but they have a relative who's an administrative assistant. Now they're going to get a better deal because of this. So that's the rationale. You also can't vote on the memorandum of agreement if you have a relative employed in the district. If you have a relative employed somewhere else, but also a member of the same statewide union, which is, we have a chart at the end that you can kind of refer to. You can't participate in negotiations, but you can vote on the contract when it finally comes. So that's that one. The second one that came out this past year, if a board member who is also a professor at a university have a conflict related to personnel. Now, it's not just if you're a professor, do you have a conflict? It was a professor at a university who provided like professional development to people in the school district in the past, and had a number of people who went through the program, not necessarily that they had them as students, but they were part of this program that did educational leadership. I think this in that district, the superintendent had been part of that program that this board member was a professor and was part of. So what they said was, so if that's your situation, you can't, even though they even said, even though it's laudable that you want to give free professional development to your school district, you can't, because there's too much of a tie in there. So you can't do that. Also couldn't participate in any discussions or decisions about any district personnel who might have gone through that program. that you are a professor in or of, whatever the proper thing is there. So that was an interesting one. It wasn't necessarily something that was readily apparent when you started reading it, but then as you read it further, it made sense. These are two that just came out years ago, but just to remember, we already kind of talked about this first part, the interviewing process. A3115 talks about that, and that's the way that the school district does it, so no issue there. And then in terms of exit interviews, and this is where there was a person who got in trouble years ago in another school district where that person felt that the superintendent wasn't doing his or her job and then decided that he was or she was going to conduct exit interviews of various staff members, was going to do all sorts of things. And no. And it was so brazen that that person actually got removed. It was pretty, it was more than even that, but that was one of the things they did. So yeah, that goes beyond policy making, planning, and appraisal, right? What can you do if you have people that are leaving and you say, well, we're really concerned about this? Can you refer that to the superintendent? And the superintendent can say, we do exit interviews, or we've been doing exit interviews, but now we're going to ask very specific questions or whatever. Yes, the superintendent is responsible for doing all that. So board members can't do it. You want to make a suggestion to the superintendent? No problem. You want to do it on your own? Problem. So let's not do that. If we go to the next slide, what we will see is these are now the recent School Ethics Commission decisions. These are just decisions that came out in 2024. So in this first case, it was a little bit of a weird scenario. There were 3 members running for the board. If I recall correctly, I think that this board member was on the board but was not running for re-election. So this board member did a video wearing some type of apparel that made it very clear they were a board member. I guess they also have badges. In some districts, the board members have like badges. Was wearing the badge, was saying like, "Hi, I'm on XY." I guess it was Lacey Township Board of Education, and I think that you should vote for these 3 people. They're going to make a big difference on the board. We're going to have a new majority, and then we can make all these changes. Yada yada yada. That went up on Facebook, so forth and so on. That was problematic in the sense that basically it was private action that could compromise the board. It also made it appear that one of the things we didn't specifically talk about, but one of the official, one of the acts that are prohibited is in section 24, prohibited acts. No school official shall use or attempt to use his official position to secure unwarranted privileges, advantages, or employment for himself, members of his immediate family, or others. So was that doing that exactly? Yes. It was problematic. They censured her, which required that board to read at a public meeting the specific penalty of a censure. The School Ethics Act even went so far as to say, well, if she were still on the board, we would have suspended her. Yeah, they were pretty upset about it. With the Baronato case over in Manchester down in Ocean County, in this particular case, a little bit weird in the sense that the board member had signed up to be a volunteer football coach, I think like in July, basically did that August through early November. He got appointed to fill an open seat on the board in late August. And the reality is there are numerous School Ethics Act decisions that say, look, you can't, even though we like people to volunteer, and you're all volunteering here, you can't volunteer in a way that has you either A, have a significant amount of contact with students, or B, potentially be directing or under the direction of one of your staff members, which would have happened here, right? This guy was one of the assistant football coaches. So the football coach, who you all vote to approve, would be then giving you guys directions and telling what to do. So it's all sorts of potential issues there that would violate the act. In this particular case, which is unusual, I don't think I've really seen this before, but it does make sense. Board member didn't even, like, he got appointed on August 29th. I don't know that he even had his ethics training, right from the get-go. He didn't know it was a problem. By the time he found out it was a problem, he had already said, well, I'm not going to be volunteering next season. So what they said was they looked at the nature of the contact and the specifics of this case, and they said, you know what, probably we would normally give this guy some kind of a penalty, but in this case, we're not giving him any penalty. Was it a violation? Yes. Is there any penalty? No. Doesn't happen a lot. Usually, I mean, even times when they say, well, I checked with the board attorney said I could do it. And a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, well, you got a bad opinion there. And then they still reprimand or censure them. That's never happened in one of our districts, I'm thankful to say. Yeah, theoretically that could happen. So they're usually pretty harsh about this. This case involving the Woodbine Board of Ed, Gregory Hutchins. So there's a couple of things that this board member should not have done. There was an employee who was going to be discussed in executive session, and there was going to be a disciplinary event of some kind. The board member was good friends with the employee, right? So, your first thought would be, well, I'm not going to participate in any of this, right? I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion. I'm not going to vote on this. I'm just going to be like, you tell your friend, hey, I know I'm on the board, but I can't do anything about this. In fact, I can't even participate in the discussion. Yeah, that's not what happened here. Instead, the employee said, well, I'm sick and I can't come to the board meeting. Can you pick up this letter and deliver it to all of the board members, but don't deliver it to the superintendent? So, I don't know where the alarm bells didn't go off, but they didn't. So she did that. She gave it to the business administrator. She gave it to all the board members. Now, this happened, 2023, whenever it was. I don't know, like email exists. Why do they have to send a handwritten letter to all the board members? But it doesn't matter. And then so everyone gets a copy of it except for the superintendent. Then the superintendent gives his or her rationale as to what should happen here. And then the board member then starts questioning the superintendent's position, I want to say advocating for the employee, and questioning the superintendent, basically insinuating the superintendent was a liar. So, okay, a lot to unpack there. A couple of problems. Number one, that's not really supporting personnel in the proper performance of their duties, right? Number two, under the prohibited acts section, you as a board member cannot represent any person or party other than the school board or the school district in connection with any issue, proceeding, application, or other matter pending before the school district. So what they found is that, when you did all this, you were basically representing the employee against the school district. Not okay. So there were those weren't the only problems, but there were a number of problems there. Taking private action that could compromise the board. So that resulted in a suspension for 60 days. So that was a pretty serious offense. And again, don't know why the alarm bells didn't go off, but the general thought process should be, if I'm really close to someone who has a matter pending before the board, and again, it depends upon the nature of it. You don't always have to recuse, but probably more often than not, especially when you might derive some kind of personal benefit from the person getting some type of decision on that, you probably should recuse. And the other thing that also was a problem too is they found that it was using your official position to secure unwarranted privileges, advantages, or other employment, that they wouldn't otherwise have. So, for example, someone who wasn't friends with the board member would not have had that direct conduit to all of the other board members and that type of thing. In this case with I think it's Mantua. I don't know how to pronounce it. That's not my, Gloucester County is not my normal hangout, but, which I'm sure is lovely, by the way. I think it's Mantua. So this particular situation, there were people who came to the board meetings who were giving, I guess, the board and this particular guy, Ryan, a hard time. So, or Mr. Campbell, I don't know him personally. So Mr. Campbell thought it was a good idea to call this person's principal. She was he or she, I forget which, was a teacher in another school district, called the person's principal, said, hey, I'm a member of the Mantua Township Board of Ed, and you need to know what this person is doing, and she needs to stop doing this, et cetera, et cetera. So no, you can't use your position as a board member to intimidate people or try to get people fired or silence members of the public or to encourage them not to attend meetings, right? Like you just can't do that. So that board member was censured when, and I'm not really sure what the thought process was. Did he think that was never going to get back to that person? I'm not really sure what happened there. So he got himself into trouble for doing that. So don't do that. So we're clear about that. members of the public, as we know, they can come up and they can speak on any topic school related. And sometimes they say things that we don't like, and we say, thank you for your comment. And we think about it, and then we move on. So in this case involving Alamucci, we had a scenario in which a board member had a child who had a code of conduct violation. Okay, that happens. Are you allowed to say to the superintendent, I think this should be changed, or I don't think this was fair, I'd like to appeal it or whatever? Sure, that's all fine. You can do that. But can you do what she did, which was saying to the superintendent, I need your direct intervention and a reversal of the finding, and the superintendent saying that this person pressed on to the point of threatening me, saying in the presence of others that she could not stand her and the board needed to hold her accountable, saying that about the superintendent. And then sending an email to all the board members, not saying she was doing it as a parent, but just saying she was doing it as a board member. And then also, oddly, and thankfully we don't represent the school district, but not that they're a bad district, but weren't involved in this. The person contacted the board attorney and tried to get the board attorney involved with all of this. So a lot of problems there. Number one, trying to get unwarranted privileges that she wouldn't have gotten had she not been a board member. That was probably the first problem. Number two, not supporting school personnel and the proper performance of their duties. It was, and basically also, I think it says there that she gave a direct order to certain school personnel to alter her child's disciplinary records. Yeah, a whole host of problems and things that you shouldn't do. And this happens from time to time when you have a board member who has children in the school. That's certainly something that happens, whether it's a code of conduct violation or a HIB allegation. And there have been times, I mean, I've even been to one in another school district where a board member was appealing a decision made by the superintendent in a disciplinary matter. That's fine, right? We had it's a little bit awkward, but we did it. We got through it. But going to the point that she went to, some of the things she did were fine. And that was what the School Ethics Commission said, but there were clearly things that crossed the line. So not appropriate. And then I think this might be the last one, East Orange Board of Ed. So this board member used to be the chief of staff for Sheila Oliver. This actually happened like in 18 or 19. Yeah, so Sheila so this happened like in 18 or 19 when she was still alive and so forth and so on. So this person wanted to suspend the current board policy that said you can only name schools after people who are deceased. At this time, she was still alive, and the proposed name is free from some type of political connotation. That just wasn't the case, obviously, with Sheila Oliver. She didn't meet either one of those criteria. And the board member acted in that official capacity, knowing that she clearly had a conflict of interest here. She served as this person's chief of staff. There was a question as to whether or not she was doing it because she was friendly with that person or whether she thought maybe she was going to curry political favor by doing this. But that is the type of thing that, there's a point in time when you realize I'm too close to this and I can't be voting on this or discussing it. And that was one of them. So she got censured for those actions, and they found that she surrendered her independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups and was trying to use the schools for personal gain for either herself or for her friends. So that was problematic. All right. And then if we talk about, social media, just quickly, we'll talk about this. I think I probably talked about it last year too, but just as a refresher, do you give up your First Amendment rights when you are a member of the board? No. Can you say whatever you want and not have any consequences? No. We know that, right? Things that we should do in terms of making sure that we don't potentially have a problem in a School Ethics Act issue. Don't post anything that's going to violate the district's policies for board members, right, or your bylaws. I mean, if you do that, there's going to be an issue, and someone probably will end up filing a complaint, and you might have some difficulty defending that. Some of these are straightforward, right? Don't make defamatory statements about the board, the school district, the employees, the students, their families. That would be problematic. Don't disclose confidential information about the school district or information that you received by virtue of the fact that you're a board member that nobody else would know. don't refer to your Board of Ed title or position when you're soliciting for some type of business organization that you or a member of your immediate family has an interest in. That's problematic as well. Don't use the social networks to have communications with other board members to have a meeting without having a meeting. And then if there's a complaint, it doesn't matter how you get the complaint, whether it's through social media, whether it's through, you're at the soccer field or, you're at the supermarket, refer those things to the superintendent. If we go to the next slide. So one of the things that comes up is in terms of private action that could compromise the board. And that's part of the School Ethics Act, that you can't take any private action that could compromise the board. That used to be, back in the day, it was about letters to the editor. And then it became like, social media posts. So from a broad perspective, so long as the content of your Facebook posting or whatever it is, whether it's, I don't know, Threads or Blue Sky or Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, if you say the following statements are made in my capacity as a private citizen, not in my capacity as a board member, and these are not representative of the board or its individual members, they solely represent my own personal opinions, depending upon the content, that probably is fine. But there were cases where someone put that disclaimer on and then said all sorts of horrible and inappropriate things. And the School Ethics Commission said, well, that's not enough. You can't just put a disclaimer on. You have to also comply with the other components of the School Ethics Act. You can't violate confidentiality. You can't defame people, so forth and so on. And the case that involved the person who did the video endorsing people who are running for the board, I don't recall that she said anything that was disclaiming that, saying that this is my personal opinion and not that of the board. But it's hard to come to that conclusion when she's wearing a shirt that says, whatever, Lacey Township Board of Ed, has the badge, says I'm a board member. These people are going to be great for the board. We're going to have a majority if you elect these people in. That made it seem like it was being said on behalf of the board. So those are the things that, in the context of a social media posting, think about that. Think about the lens that they're going to view that through. And that also, that also kind of ties into this second piece here, which is some people run for the board and they might do, like, I don't know, if I ran for a Board of Education, let's say I changed my Facebook page to Lapira for, whatever, the Oakland Board of Ed, right? And then I get elected. Once I do that, it should really just be like Vic Lapira, not Vic Lapira for the Oakland Board of Ed. Because once you're on the board, now it looks like you're still running. It's confusing. I had a case in another school district where I ended up representing two of the board members where they did that. They did have the appropriate disclaimers on their Facebook pages or whatever, and so they didn't violate the School Ethics Act, but the School Ethics Commission did say to them, you really should not be using that type of a campaign website. Once you're on the board, you have to kind of cease and desist doing that. So it could lead to the filing of they actually said it could lead to the filing of unnecessary ethics complaints, which is what happened. So I think there might be one or two more slides, not much here, I think. Oh, this is okay. So board member recusal. So the important definitions to know: immediate family member, that's going to be your spouse or dependent child residing in the same household. Relative is basically everybody else other than specifically mentioned a cousin. Technically a cousin could still be a relative, but or it could be an other, as they say. You can't try to secure benefits for others or relatives. It requires, it doesn't matter whether it's by blood, marriage, or adoption, all of those people, in-laws, step, whatever, all that counts. So that's important because there are certain provisions that say that you can't try to get personal, can't use it for personal gain or for the gain of others. If there is someone who is a member of a union, it impacts negotiations. First of all, if you're related to someone who works in the district, it directly impacts negotiations and also means that you can't evaluate the superintendent or anybody that is indirectly or directly supervising your family member, right? So that's a limitation. Doesn't mean you can't be on the board, but it just curtails what you can do. In terms of someone who's in a different statewide union, if it's an immediate family member, definitely you can't participate in negotiations. If it's someone else, and this is where, maybe some people are going to get talk to people that they haven't spoken to in a while now that you're on the board. So like, hey, I know that you're my, second cousin or whatever, but do you have a leadership position in your local education association? Are you on your district's negotiating team, or do you have some other leadership role? You're a grievance chairperson? Because those are really case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, if like, let's say it's your uncle is a member of a teaching, is a member of the teaching staff in a neighboring district. Generally speaking, is that going to mean that you can't participate in negotiations here? No. If your uncle is also the lead negotiator for that district, probably, yeah, you're not going to be able to participate here. So if you have that situation, if you're considering being part of negotiations, when negotiations comes up, make sure you check your relatives and what they do and what their leadership roles are in different places. And again, that's only for, it also applies if you are a teaching staff member employed outside the district.
So my niece is over at Wesley Park, and she just started, but I can do negotiations here.
Yeah, the only way that it would potentially be a problem is if she were like the union's lead negotiator or something like that. Right. Right. No, not yet. Yes. So no, I mean, if it were a dependent child, different story, right? Right. Okay. So then I think that there might be one or two more slides. This is probably the second to last slide. This is just a chart. And you can consult the chart, but if you have a question, please, it's not going to take a long time. Just call us and give us the information. We can say yay or nay pretty quickly. And frankly, I will tell you that because this doesn't come up every day, but it does come up a couple times a year, I always pull out this chart to check, and then I check the appropriate case to make sure, or advisory opinion as the case may be. But this chart is usually a pretty good start. And what it basically means is, as you can see, if you've got someone employed in the district, you have limitations as to what you can do in negotiations. Outside the district, if it's a spouse or dependent child, no, you're not gonna be able to participate. If it's a non-dependent child, or a relative, maybe you can participate. Probably you can participate. And then can you vote to ratify the contract? It really depends upon, where the person is employed. And superintendent issues, we talked about that. So I think the last question or the last one, yeah, that's it. So I don't know.
All right.
I don't know if I was fast or not, or maybe it was a little bit faster than last year.
Let's say, if you're also representing constituents when you're not important,
Right.
of course, you have something that's definitely confidential. But ideas, opinions, views, I guess it's judged by what you say, how you say it's going to be like. My main question is, like, you're gonna come. Oh, what?
Sorry about that, Mike Discipline. My main question, like you're an incumbent, just a muse here, and so you're running for office again, and you have definitive opinions on something. Maybe they should have got rid of that person, or I'm definitely not for that, or a referendum, or whatever it is. I mean, you would preface it though, of course, with this is even though I'm on the board, it's a private.
So yes, if you preface that saying this is my personal view, not speaking on behalf of the board, so forth and so on, generally speaking, fine. However, I would be careful about anything about specific personnel or anything like that, because those are the areas where you can get in trouble. If it was like, well, the board has this policy and that is the board's policy, I personally don't agree with it, and that's my view as a private citizen, not as a board member. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. Yes, you don't give up all your First Amendment rights when you become a member of the board.
Right. I'm not looking to be antagonistic or anything, but sometimes things get controversial and people want to know your opinion, and you feel like, hey, I want, for better or worse, you want them to know where you stand on something.
Yeah, it's just always have to be careful. People should be careful even if they're on the board, but on the board it's even more so.
But it's my understanding that under the Code of Ethics, we're not allowed to revisit. Once the board's made a decision, we're not supposed to revisit that. And so if someone asks you about something, even if you disagreed, you can say, well, as is on the public record, I disagreed with that decision. I voted against it for the following reasons, which is what I said at the time. Right. But you really can't, you're not necessarily supposed to go beyond that. So
Right. I think it makes, because at the end of the day, when the board acts and the board adopts something, that's what the board has adopted. And now it's incumbent upon the board members to basically support that. You might have voted no at the time,
right.
But the board is an entity, right? And that's the board's official position. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but could you refer to saying like, well, I spoke for 10 minutes about this at the board meeting on September 12th or whatever, and you know how I feel about it. Okay, that's fine.
Right.
There's no objections there.
And I wasn't commenting on anyone else here. I'm just saying. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, gotcha.
It's just,
gotcha.
it's a good
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I mean, and I've seen ethics training when I go to some other districts. Sometimes they have people from New Jersey school boards who do it too. And they will always say that, right? Once the board makes a decision, that's the board's action. Your board members, you basically have to support that. You can still have your own feelings about it, but you still need to support and echo the fact that this is the board's
Do
policy.
you want to say something?
Let's say you did not comment at the board meeting, yay or nay, and then you want to comment later. That seems like you should have commented at the board meeting and not
Yeah, that's
after.
where I think you potentially have risk, right? As a board member who's making those comments, the potential issues there. So yeah, the appropriate time to do it is when you're, at the board meeting and you're taking the vote and you express your opinions, and then that's that.
All right. Well, this was very informative. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
All right.
Why
Very
anyone
good.
would want to be a board member, we don't know.
Can I ask if we can
Have a
get
great meeting.
copies? If he can email.
Oh, could you
all-
email
no,
us the presentation so we could share it?
Matt has it.
Matt has it. Will you share it with us, please?
Matt.
Thank
Aw, Thank you, Matt.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
meeting. Congratulations on the referendum.
Thank you so much. It was nice to see you. Moving on now to item D, the superintendent's comments.
So good evening. And I also want to extend my deep gratitude for the Board of Education, our administrative team, and the amazing parents that really provided all of the support by attending informational sessions regarding the referendum, going on tours, and asking lots of questions so that we could make sure that each member who voted was well informed. So we really are excited about the referendum and the future for our students. So I just want to thank everyone. Also, we know in talking with members of our community, we know there's considerable anxiety right now about the meaning of recent federal executive orders. We just want you to know that we in Princeton Public Schools believe that it is our sacred responsibility to educate every single child whose parents entrust them to us. This district has been working closely with community partners, educational and legal experts to ensure the safety and well-being of all of our students. So it's really important that we say that. And then we do have a couple action items tonight. So I just want to highlight the calendars, which are always fun. I want to, so this year, we are making a few revisions to the 24-25 calendar. So on December 31st, 2024, the governor signed new legislation, which moved the primary day from June 3rd to June 10th in observance of the Jewish holiday Shabbat. As you know, our June 3rd, we had scheduled a Flex PD day, and it was a designated snow day. So we are revising our calendar to reflect the change in the primary date. So I want to highlight the changes. So what we're doing is we are moving the Flex PD day from June 3rd to Friday, May 23rd, and this will be snow day number 3. And we may or may not use it, but it looks like maybe at least we're going to have one coming up. The other thing is, of course, we continue to work hard to remove voting for primary day. So we will be in session on June 10th primary day. We have one school who serves as a voting, or serves as a place for polling, and that's Littlebrook School. And we are going to continue to meet with the township, who have worked hard also to lobby to the Mercer County Board of Elections. And then we also have a couple changes while we were having fun to changing the 2025-26 calendar. What we are going to do is November 4th, we are going to designate as a school day, which is election day. But then this would allow us to close school on January 2nd, 2025. So students and staff can return to school on the Monday, January 5th. So it gives them this 2026. Sorry. Yes, I have it here written. 2026. I just can't read my writing. So students, so it's that Friday after New Year's Day on the January 1st, and that will students and staff will return on January 5th, 2026. And then we are going to change the April 6th day and
It's
move
my
it.
birthday.
Oh, and that's why. Because we wanted everyone
child.
in school to wish Matt a happy birthday. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Move it to Tuesday, May 26th for snow day number 2. Move flex day PD to Friday, May 22nd, snow day number 3. So that's for the next school year.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. And so now moving on, the reason we're all here tonight is for the budget workshop. Mr. Bolden, take it away, please.
Thank you. So we have a cadence of budget meetings. We'll talk about a little bit later with the calendar, but the budget workshop, it's a big picture view of the budget. You know, we don't have state aid numbers yet. They're not a huge part of our budget here, but there's certainly a lot of, innuendos and more than rumor, I would think, about what's going to come out of Trenton, but we're, eagerly awaiting that at the end of the month. We'll talk about, we talk a little bit about our strategic goals in the district, our promise to our community. We use zero-based budgeting as best we can. We'll talk about the budget calendar. We talk about school tax overview, kind of from a rear view mirror, where we've been to where we're going in the future. We'll talk a little bit about our operating budget performance over the last year, where it looks like this year and where we think it's going in the next couple of years. And then we'll take questions from the public, which won't be too many. Incoming Superintendent Dr. Sousa is here. Anyway, so we like to read this at all our, many of our meetings, but certainly when we talk about our budget, we promise to prepare all of our students to lead lives of joy and purpose as knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate citizens of a global society. Very important. We looked at our strategic planning goals. We're kind of, early stage of middle. We're focusing on the early years, wellness, inclusion, and supports for all, opportunity and achievement for all, and preparation for a meaningful life beyond PPS, super important to the district. Zero-based budgeting, real briefly, is the goal there is to assess each year, where we spend every dollar and build that budget from scratch each year. I mean, I will say in practice, it doesn't fully happen like that, but it's absolutely how we look at the budget holistically, where we're spending our dollars. And it's an important part of our strategy here. I'd like to talk about some of the many things that make Princeton Public Schools unique. We have small neighborhood schools with comparatively small class sizes. It is one of the harder things to benchmark in the state, since class size itself isn't really disclosed in too many places for our peers. You would have to do a lot of figuring with some of the state data to kind of get there. We have a world-class university in our backyard, and is very helpful to us at times and a big part of the culture in the community. We have a large number of student programs and opportunities. We have a large number of student support services. We pride ourselves on that. We have an experienced teaching staff. We have programs that are well above the state minimums. And we also have a higher population of students in the community navigating poverty. It's always surprising to others outside of the community how diverse Princeton is. We also have a 424 student charter school in town, also another surprise for many people in the state. And finally, we're committed to equity. Budget calendar, as I talked about, in November, we started planning for the budget. Central office mostly. We released our budget manual. We have a new software we've been implementing since July 1. A lot of work went into that before July when we started in earnest in mid-January of last year. So it's been a year. And then we rolled out the new payroll part of the system on January 1. So it's been a lot of work there. So it was a new software for our budget managers and staff to use. And we rolled that out to the staff and asked that they, our budget managers, to input data right before holiday winter break. Then we came back and we're still in earnest meeting with all the budget leaders, central office, Dr. Foster, Dr. Tu, Dr. Ciso Stentz. I'm not a doctor. Anyway, a lot of work with our budget managers, listening to what they, their needs and desires. We've been, focused on holding staffing, status quo over the last year or two. And it's super important, with the inflationary pressures we've had in the last few years to do that. Tonight is the budget workshop. February 25th, the governor will give his budget address. And then 2 days later, by statute, he's required to release state aid numbers across the state. We would hope to and really must adopt on March 18th the tentative budget adoption. It's required to be submitted the end of the next day. It's by statute March 20th. There is a holiday apparently on March 20th. I feel bad. Can't remember the name of it. It's a little bit of a different holiday. No, I don't think it is. Anyway, regardless, I apologize for those people who celebrate that holiday, but it was moved up a day to the 19th. And then on the 29th of April, we will have our public budget hearing and final budget adoption. So there's a lot of work between now and March 18th, really, that go into that. Hopefully, once we submit the tentative budget, we'll be in good shape. But the county reviews that, the budget there, so they could ask some detailed questions. But we work on that between those dates and then adopt in the very late April. We look here at just a snapshot. Actually, we've looked at this for the last 5 years since I've been here, and it hasn't changed. But this year, there is a shift in the public schools percentage of the overall taxes that the community pays is a smaller percentage than it has been. It's stayed pretty stagnant here. The county has gone up. You see 31%, the Princeton Public Schools. So that's a factor of the other taxes in town, the county, and the town going up by a higher percentage than the Princeton school district, us. We look at, we talk about the budget and, that word gets thrown around an awful lot. But really the main two parts of the budget, and there are others, are the general fund or the operating fund and the debt service levy. Obviously, we passed, I shouldn't say obviously, but it was just brought up. We passed the referendum a week ago. The community, I should say, passed the referendum overwhelmingly. So that was a good thing. That's really where the debt service levy comes in. And the operating budget pays for pretty much everything we do. We don't talk about a lot, certainly not here, but the special revenue where all the grants flow through. And then there's a capital budget. Once we pass a bond or have capital projects, those projects get accounted for in the capital section of the budget. So as you can see, as of right now, 3% of the budget goes towards the debt service. That will go up with the referendum being passed. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail a little later. This talks more about a debt service levy. As of right now, there's 3 issues outstanding. As of December 31st, the town CFO always emails me the first week in January and asks for this, so it's readily apparent we had just over $48 million of debt. The last issue that we issued was in December, right before the winter break last year, and we maintained our AAA rating. So that's one of the most important things I like to talk about. We're one of 2 AAAs with Moody's in the state. There are some others with Standard & Poor's. So we will have to go through that process again, and they will look at it a little in more, not that they're not earnest always, but a little more scrutiny, being that the level of debt we're going to be issuing is higher. So it's super important. This is a chart of the debt service levy. As you can see, it will go up to about 14% higher than it was at the previous peak in 2021. So, we're looking forward to all the capital projects we're going to be able to do over the next 3 to 4 years. The actual calendar 2024 school tax levy, I just want to point out that the town has a December 31st, which is quite common in the state, and we have a June 30th. So there's always a each resident will get a subsequent tax bill as the budget is passed, and then that gets tacked on to the calendar year.
Is that every district in the state?
Not every district, but
Oh,
there are a few variations out there, but that's the most common in the state of New Jersey.
thanks.
The tax rate increased in calendar 2024 from 1.236 to 1.263. I thought that was a typo at first. It was not. I had to check it like 3 times because I kept thinking I messed that up. And the net asset valuation, or the ratables that each house is assessed by the tax assessor in town, did increase also. It increased 0.3% from 23 to 24. Which mean that the tax levy is shared across a slightly larger total assessed valuation. That means that a 2.4% calendar year school tax levy increase, it felt an effective tax increase, or it felt more like 2.16 because there was a larger base of taxpayers to absorb that. So that was a good thing. This chart, we look at the over, 9 years. Is it 9 or 10 years now? It looks at the enrollments and compares them to the general or operating fund tax levy increases. This came up in discussion recently, asking about, there was a couple years there. Of course, I don't like to talk about the global pandemic, but it was related to the global pandemic, and there was certainly a lot of concern in 2021. If I know some of you are looking around, we passed the budget out in the parking lot on March 17th, the tentative adoption in March 17th of 2020. There were some colorful posts in the local blogger, school board in the dark, right? School board members in the dark, something like that. It was very witty. And we were all in a big circle with one of the former teachers in the district sitting there watching us. In a lawn chair. It was, so it was a time where, there certainly was a lot of unknown, and the operating tax levy was held in bay for a couple of years there. And then, but that tax goes into the banked tax bank. It sits there, and we could use it for 3 subsequent years, which we were able to. So you only give up a really small fraction of the taxes, basically give a small piece on the compounding. So, but that's where you can see some of that aberration over time. And then in the past, tax rates were a little higher too. This is what I was just talking about, banked tax cap. We don't have any banked tax available right now. So we're looking at 25, 26. And then I kind of track what's the quote unquote foregone tax levy that we lose on that compounding. If it sits in the bank for a couple of years, it's a very small amount. And it describes here the definition: unused taxation or spending authority that can be saved for 3 future budget years. The current state law of the land is a 2% cap, which is very, very difficult in this day and age. I mentioned a little earlier about inflation. That's been really affecting school districts, wage pressure, transportation costs, shortages, right, of employees, which is seemingly, it's come a little bit more in balance now, equilibrium. Obviously, a lot of current events in the last couple months throwing, things into a little bit of chaos. Bond yields are back up again a little bit. So we're really watching that closely. We look at the percentage of our revenues. And the big thing here is that with Cranberry and the university and our tax levy, we are 92% of our revenues come from the local level, about 8% from the state. And a big chunk of that is from special education extraordinary aid, which is essentially a grant that flows through the state, which we apply for each year. We look at.
If you could go back there, what's our federal aid? Because I know that's a question that's come up.
So when we talk about, I touched on briefly, the concept at least, the special revenue fund is where our grants flow through. It's required to go through there. Effectively, the biggest piece of the federal aid is the IDEA grant, which is special ed funding, and it does go directly to out-of-district special ed tuitions, and it's a little over $1 million. There's some other services also.
So it's like 1%, would you say?
It would be, a little less than 1%.
Okay.
Are we
we also get some small amount of Every School Succeeds Act or title grants, if you will. We don't get a lot of that, and we can't supplant our regular spending. It goes to extra things, some summer programming, et cetera, et cetera.
So we're I assume prepared if we, there could be, funding may come, might be delayed. There might be, I just don't know that we can necessarily, know what's going to happen with that, but I assume we're preparing to understand what we would do if that didn't show.
Yeah, it wouldn't be as devastating for us as many districts.
Does it come all in one tranche, or does it come on over time? Is it something that we would wait for? Like, when does it normally?
Well, it counts
disperse?
really from an accounting standpoint when, the award, which should be happening, the federal government, it's on a September 30th is their year end. But so we would have to know, it would happen after our budget's adopted.
Right.
So, but that's happened from time to time, even with some of the state rules.
Right.
So we would have to then probably re-amend our budget and find that shortfall. If that were to happen, I think it's probably a heavy lift even for, I don't like to get political, but it's a pretty heavy lift to be able to do it as quickly as
March.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But
The university, am I right, they were saying they were going to be giving,
$14.6 million over the next 5 years. Some of that money got eaten up already by the charter school formula. We can't control that. Is that true?
well, it's a good segue here. It's looking at our revenues. What the board member Bierman is talking about is the Princeton University down here, that line item, which was new to the district. It started really on January of 2020, calendar 22. The university is on a calendar year. Like the town, we're on a June 30th year end. So they have made a promise to donate money to our operating budget. There's also a piece that sits in the special revenue fund as a local grant, and that's specifically towards strategic parts of our strategic plan. So we're using it to supplement some social emotional counseling that's going on in the school. One of the things that many districts across the country, I should say, really have experienced a lot of first people were talking about more is related to COVID, but, a lot of issues with student behavior. Some people are citing, social media as the culprit. There's not just one reason why, but many reasons. So we're using part of that money to supplement that and a few other programs.
So Adam, I think what you were talking about is we got extra state aid last summer,
Right.
and that went right to charter.
Oh, okay. The state aid. Okay. State aid then.
The match, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but it was the exact amount the charter
If I
went
recall, it
up.
was like about 600,000
Yeah.
and it was eaten up by that
Yeah.
tuition.
All of them and more.
Yes, yeah.
That actually did not cover the increase. We had to take some from our budget too.
Yeah, if you look at the next slide, you'll see that the charter school, it's a little volatile. But here we are in fiscal 25. There was a big jump up to almost $8 million from 2 years ago, almost $1 million over 2 years. So the state aid increases that we're able to get here, which are categorical state aid, which means it's based on student populations. The state has actually started using their actual formula they came up with about 12 years ago. And there was a hiatus there of about 10 years. So I think it was about 14 years ago, they came up with a pretty good formula, actually. They didn't fund it for 10 years. So there's been a whole lot of districts around the state that were, quote unquote, held harmless. So even though their enrollments went down, their state aid stayed the same. So when they started to, about 5 years ago, fund that formula, it created a lot of problems in some districts. We were, as I've kind of talked about a couple of times, kind of outside of that group.
Yeah.
Based on our state aid.
South Brunswick got caught up in that horribly. Expansion, and then the formula hit them and stuff. But
Yes.
are we going to get to the deficit or no? Coming up.
So this table looks historically at our revenues going back 5 years. Our 24-25, you see our tax levy at the top here, which is the bulk of our revenues. We do get tuitions. We get Cranberry tuitions. A lot of people don't realize, so I'll spend a little time on that I had a few conversations, and some of them were, based on people calling in about the referendum. And it was interesting. I won't go into too much detail, but, asking questions about, and some people didn't realize that Cranberry students, they pay per student actual tuition. So it's calculated each year. I work on it. It's as part of the budget now, we basically true up to the actual certified tuition from 2 years ago. So then we look at what was charged to Cranberry based on the certified tuitions that we get in late January. We got in this year for 2024. So it's always looking back retrospectively there. So that goes up and down. You can see here that the tuition has gone down because the enrollment at the high school is down. It was up to as pretty close to 280 when I started. It's down around 220-ish right now. So,
And that tuition rate is set by the state?
So it's an estimated rate until we get the actual certified rate based on our audit. So the board accepted the audit at the last board meeting, and we went over that in operations in early January. So it's always kind of lagging where they'll get certified. So then we true up to what was actually the audited tuitions. And that would be for the high school. It's separated. There's special education tuition rates. There's K-5, 6-8, and then high school.
They also pay for their transportation and special
They
education.
do.
Oh, we'd like to ask. I don't want to keep on interrupting.
Sure, go ahead.
You said, and I've learned since I've been here, special ed is just so unpredictable to budget for. Does that continue to be a problem?
Yeah, special ed is it's hard to manage in the short term. You could have longer term policies, but the out of district placements is uneven. We do look on the expense side. You can see I've come up with this in the 5.5 years I've been here. We look at in this the salaries and benefits at the top, which is about 75% of our budget. But you can see here that the student services, tuitions, and some special service counseling, et cetera, is, it was kind of flat here. It went down in 22 quite a bit, and then it bounced back in a change over 2 years of about $1.5 million. So it can be volatile.
And this is just a muse, a hope. We won't see like a special ed collective like in the county. No one's talking about that.
It's always a topic of conversation. I think that districts, like I said, in the longer term would like to, we're in a somewhat challenging spot, a district of about 3,800 approximately students now. We're not large enough to probably serve every specific special ed need that we have, that we can have. But at times we do use the county here. And then we do send one student out of district to a neighboring district. It does happen. So, but it's always a topic of conversation and a goal for school districts in general. So we covered pretty much most of the revenues. One of the things that's, I guess and you look at 23-24 here, the miscellaneous and interest revenue went up quite a bit. So the plus side of inflation, I guess, is higher interest earnings and some earnings from invested proceeds from referendums, invested proceeds of unspent referendum dollars. And we're not allowed to increase referendum spending on projects with those interest payments. It either goes into capital reserve. We're able to deposit $1 million into capital reserve in 24. So that was better. Extraordinary aid was down. The state goes through these cycles where they had increased. Governor Murphy overall in about 7 years now has been really pro-education. And the extraordinary aid is a formula, and it's based on the state budgeting. And so it had increased. You can see here it kind of goes up and down. That's a big swing there. And then it's come back down here to a little bit over $2.3 million. The university we talked about.
Matt, on the extraordinary aid, if the state would change the way they calculate that, where they're talking about now they do it based on averages versus actual students, would that help us?
Averages.
They calculate the amount of reimbursement based on a state average that you should have based on your population as opposed to the actual population that you have in your school. So if you have more kids that are.
Well, we actually do go through. It's a very, I spend a lot of time on it with a few other people in the district, and it's actually by each student. So we calculate each student, what their, did they meet the criteria? First of all, there's a whole stringent list of things if they met it. You know, it's not just the dollars. They have to have extraordinary services, such as a one-to-one aid for at least half the year. There's various categories. So you go through literally each student. And you might have been mentioned, because I've talked about it a lot over the years. I use average salaries to make it a little bit more tenable to calculate. So I don't go through and recalculate every student, and we allocate our in-district costs, and it's time consuming, but it's helpful to maximize the amount of dollars we can get back. It is a lot. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it when we get the money back. But when the state doesn't increase it, when they leave that state line item flat for a couple of years, obviously inflationary pressures decrease on average what each district gets. Obviously, we could have a year, or other districts could have a year where there's, you know, a lot of out of district placements. That pretty much looks at the actual expenses. Revenues for the district. We look at some of the expenses. We talked about how salaries and benefits are about 75% of our budget. And we mentioned charter schools. Some of the other things you can see, we've been spending a lot on maintenance costs over the years. It's definitely something we've been tasked with. Well, one of the things too, when you look at this analysis, you have salaries on the top, and then these are contracted expenses. There was a period of time when we had a lot of positions that were retiring in the facilities and custodial and maintenance staff. So we have a lower amount of fewer, I should say, employees now on our maintenance staff. So we have to supplement that with contracted services. There's pros and cons that we're not going to get into here, but we've definitely been priding ourselves on fixing things and fixing them well as best we can. It's always a point of emphasis for us. Energy costs have gone up significantly. Transportation is one area where I talked about the inflationary pressures. Almost virtually, we're about split here, about 50-50 in-house versus contracted transportation. But pretty much every contractor in the state 3 years ago did not renew their contracts, and we had everyone in the state went out to bid. And so we had a year over year. That year was 35% increase in our contracted routes. And then we've had a lot of, we had to increase our pay for our bus drivers and transportation aides, which is a good thing too, partly.
So do you
aside from costing more money,
is that
their
stabilizing?
wages have come up. Yes, it has been stabilizing the last year.
And with now that we had the referendum approved and with our planning, are we trying to kind of reduce our transportation? I know that the town is talking about the free bus isn't going to help us, but you know,
probably not. I did bring it up at the meeting, as they have a small committee. We had a first meeting a little while ago, and I did bring it up that they should think outside the box, and if they could, in certain times of the day, circle by the high school would be a specific area, possibly the middle, but more likely the high school. It could help to get students to go around town, but the planned referendum will really help, we think, with having hopefully more students who can walk to school. It's a lot of students in our community currently do, but we want to increase that percentage. Yes, Susan.
What's the increase next year in athletics? And then it comes back down.
Those are just forecasts. So I think it's a little rosy to think that it may come back down to 800,000.
Yeah, I didn't know what the increase was.
Could be a slightly rosy forecast there.
Yeah, I didn't know what the increase was. I don't know if you were adding a sport or because you went.
Well, we've come in under budget. So our if you look, the actual I always try to, as best we can, and you'll hear me say this, probably get bored of hearing me say it at times, but we try to really look at what our actual, we're not even talking about budgeted fund balance here because, that's money in the bank we want to save for capital projects. So the state is very strict in New Jersey where we can only put away 2% of our operating fund. And I mentioned earlier about our Moody's bond review. They want to see a target of 20%. So when they look at other states in the United States, we're an aberration there. It's very conservative. So it's always a balance between having too much fund balance and if you put too much in capital reserve, then Moody's doesn't count it either, because then you can never take it out of capital reserve only for capital projects. And that's by statute. So I got sidetracked. You were asking me about the athletics.
Yeah, when you get a chance, just see if it
Well, we've
looks
been
like there was
budgeting a
some
little
change.
higher. I think we did a little better than the actual budgeted amount. So, maybe we can hit 800,000 in a couple,
Right, it's just at 879, so I didn't know if there was like a change or something that we're doing differently.
Well, you can see over the last few years, one of the things that jumps out is the increases, and we have 2 contracted services. We're utilizing some contracted
Right, I knew the
pool management
pool
services is the
management,
bigger
that was
dollar
like- I
amount,
knew that was.
and athletic training we're also using through a contracted provider.
All right, so
partially.
maybe just take a look.
partially.
I'm sure it's something that we're just moving from one place. It might be another employee or 2 that was an employee and now is a contractor, but just.
How's the shared services with Montgomery in transportation and maintenance? Is that evolving? Is that kind of the future, hopefully?
Yeah, it's actually working out really well. We had trouble having our buses fixed by private contractors, and myself and Donna reached out to our neighbor to the north, Montgomery, and they had 3 mechanics. We don't have any mechanics or a bus garage. This is our bus garage outside. Well, the windows are closed. But yes, they're doing a great job. Our cost, it's helped both on the cost side and more importantly, though, on the qualitative side. They've done a great job. We've done better with our bus inspections, which happen twice a year. So it's been a good thing.
Can you speak to RX a little bit? How are we doing with that?
Not very well. Some of the trends that we hear about with the class of diabetes/weight loss drugs has really affected us. We're trending about 25% right now. We're self-insured on the prescription side, and so hopefully it's making people healthier. Right. I know. I'm speaking from finance person. So, but there's still a lot of research out there with the amount of people, and I'm not going to proliferate and go on about this, but I mean, a lot more people are taking those than they maybe should be, and they're getting some short-term benefits. So I'm not sure quite how healthy of a choice that is, but I'm not going to keep going. I'll shut up.
Because you're not a doctor.
I am not a doctor. I just said that twice now. Yes.
I know.
Why did my screen go? Okay. Go ahead.
I have a couple comments, you know me. So a couple things I want to say. What?
Did I do that out loud?
Yeah. I was just listening a little to the all the people running for Democrats for governor, and they brought up school funding, which was quite fascinating. And a couple have been mayors, so I feel it might be something that they all might talk about. It might be something we get to see. So for me, a couple things is we are a public school in a community with a lot of non-public schools, and we spend, PPS, not me, spends a lot of time and energy because the state gives us all the money for the non-publics, and then we have to divvy it out. And I know we spend a lot of time and I know we approve it, and I know it gets on there. And so it would be great if that wasn't our administration problem and it went more to, I don't know, the state, the county, somewhere. Anyway, I just want to bring that up because it is something that our staff is spending time on and that we're managing and all that. So anyway, one thing, so maybe, with our new governor, parking's always my big one. And I hope we're still working a little with the town, so that we don't have to pay for a certain parking. And, we'll see what happens over at Littlebrook, and hopefully, I know we don't pay for parking over there, but we'll have better flow, which will be really good. People always ask me, why do we pay for school supplies? I would love that school budget number to go away. I would love for us to be able to work more with the PTOs. And I know these are not big dollars. People always say that to me, but I'm a micro person. And so this is what I see every year. The other big one is in bus is amazing going up. And I know, transportation's been going up and everything. But do we ever work with families to really opt out? And I know the state has laws that, in case all your state people are listening, we have to have a seat for every child and this and that. But I know friends that pick their kids up every day who never take the bus, which is, that's fine. That's their priority.
But sorry, man, really quickly. I mean, this is where I take issue. This is where I think the town, if they had a robust bus system, then if people that most basically every day you pick up your kid, but the times that you can't, you need an option. So if the town had a robust bus system, I do think that it would help us on our.
Yeah, we did the opt-outs. We actually, a lot of people don't realize that you are allowed to have your people that are eligible for the busing to opt out. I think we had 150 or so odd families that did opt out. But the statute also says that we have to take them back if they ask. So more importantly, we do track our load counts, if you will, on the buses, and certain routes have higher, occupancy than others. So we try to overload those routes as best we can, kind of trying to hit close, which is kind of impossible, that peak number, because it's a peak thing, right? If one day you have 55 kids on a 54 passenger bus, it doesn't work. So through active management there, and you mentioned non-publics, and we do, and it's probably another thing for that chart earlier on in the presentation about one of the unique things. We have 3 really large public schools in our location. So she's talking about the requirement.
Non-public.
Sorry, I said public, non-public. Yes, and we are obligated for the pass-throughs. We administer those, and it's significant. But the transportation, we also bus those kids. So in the charter, we're obligated to bus also. So we're that rare district that's not. We really have I'll call it a modified 2-tier bus schedule because it's partially with the non-publics, but we have similar start times too. So there are possible areas of efficiency, but there are a lot of reasons why, the high school is starting later, right? There's very so.
Right. And we did that knowing it was better for kids.
Absolutely.
No, I know. I mean, I know there's a lot in there. But, just because of the future that's coming, that we need to really look at things.
Absolutely.
So I thank you every year.
You're welcome.
Are we going to speak to the deficit that's estimated 26, 20? I mean, this is what we see every year. I don't know how you make it.
Well,
The
I think the
estimated.
for me, the biggest part, and you brought up healthcare because I've been bringing it up this year quite a bit, healthcare costs, but the effect on, if you looked at the revenue side, the interest has kind of helped this year to keep us above, the excess of revenues over expenditures was pretty good this year, but really that was driven by miscellaneous, mostly interest revenue being a little higher. It's super important to control labor costs and healthcare costs, and it's always daunting. And without the university, I mean, this would look a lot different, without the contribution. So that was, I don't want to go into too many details, but they took properties off the tax roll they were legally allowed to do, and then they passed through what would have been sent to the town, and so it was a one-time budgetary, a super positive budget effect,
Right.
of that.
But we are coming to the cliff. I mean, the cliff is coming in a year or two where
Thank
we
you.
don't have some extraordinary event that saves us. And we have teacher contracts. We're happy with our negotiations, but they're higher than 2%, right? So
Yes.
we do have this approximate gap normally of about $500,000 every year that we have to find. And it will only get larger.
And again, we have to look at, maybe we can't have it all. There might be cuts, some compression. Dapta, you'd mentioned something about a mechanism though, to help if we did have a deficit or something.
Well, we have an option. We can't, we're only allowed to raise taxes by the tax levy by 2%, but we can put the budget to a vote, right? So, like this time next year.
Well, there's some districts, Westfield is the one that I actually lived there for a few years and a long time ago. Anyway, but they went back to an April vote. If you remember, I'm sure Dr. Seuss remembers, and the other people that have been in education a long time. There was reasons why that districts went away from that. It was always a
absolutely.
contentious time, but
Yes.
it does give you more flexibility.
Yeah.
So it is a possible trend. It is a trend that's starting to
Well,
maybe.
it's like having a referendum every April, right? Like,
Right. And then there's been more success with districts having operating referendums, if you will.
Yeah.
moving forward, talking about fund balance, which is essentially the money that we've invested. It's really money in the bank because the state doesn't allow us to do anything crazy with investments. I don't think that we can only go out 13 months with treasuries, very safe agencies, money market, government money market funds. So, but it's essentially the excess funds or money invested. It has gone up over the last 5 or 6 years, which is a good thing. We're at reasonably good levels. We've been able to put back money back into fund balance. Capital reserve for future projects as needed, which is a good thing. Excuse me, need some water. So I talked a little bit in this slide about some of the reasons we've used the capital reserve over the past to augment the 2018 bond referendum. And we did HVAC, the restroom facility behind the turf field is in the bottom corner there. And I always talk about the difference between the free fund balance and the capital reserve fund balance. If you have too much, quote unquote, free fund balance that's outside of the capital reserve, the state, like 14 years ago, did go around to districts and take it. So it's like I was talking about, New Jersey has very conservative accounting rules. So, it's a double-edged sword with that.
So that's at odds with what Moody's would want us to.
Yeah, they look for 20%. It's one of the things that kind of, although we are AAA, but it's not for that reason, so.
This is more my ignorance. I'm learning about this. With our insurance, health insurance is what and salaries are, the big part of this whole thing. Do we, what's our negotiating power with insurance providers, and do we have a tiered system with our teachers where some higher paid employees can put more in, pay more into their insurance? And also maybe deductibles go higher.
Before I got here, there was a push towards the health savings accounts, which hadn't made much of an inroad in many districts, but it was being pushed here. And there was a certain number of employees. I was part of it for a while, but I mean, there's a reason why I'm not now, and it's not because it was a good deal for me. But it hasn't taken a hold. We don't like to talk too much about unions and stuff. It's really so not so much on the negotiation side with the benefits. It's one of the, well, I was going to say benefits, but that sounds redundant. But one of the benefits, quote unquote, of working for the school district are the good benefits. So it's hard to make inroads there with the benefit costs. We did change insurance brokers right after I got here. We went out to an RFP. I think there was a long-standing relationship with the department. So we've done well there with keeping, and we've been fortunate. Actually, in many ways, having very consistent claims ratios. I was talking about that recently, and we can talk about that a little bit more in closed session. But but you never know when that's going to change. So,
but I always ask this question: what keeps you up at night, if anything, about this budget? I always go for, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah, there's many things that keep me up at night. Trying to open this bottle of water. No.
Pete Alonso is unsigned.
Yes. That's really getting under my skin. No, definitely health insurance is a big driver of our budget. This is a pie chart of, you can see right here, 75% of our expenses go to salary and benefits. If you add in charter school, it's 82%. And then there's not a lot left over for discretionary. I mean, out of district tuitions and student services is certainly, not really discretionary. Transportation costs about 3%. So there's not a lot of the pie left over for discretionary spending, if you will. Questions or more questions?
Well, great job, Matt. Thank you.
And can we just?
Welcome.
Thank you so much. That's great. I just wanted to talk about something that came up a lot in the referendum meetings with people is people really don't understand our finances, and I think we've talked about this for years. How do we better be more transparent and is it possible? I guess we often present this to the council. Not a lot of people go to the council meetings, but is it possible for us to have at the library, for example, during budget season, just to have a Q&A or have a say where, people can come and talk and ask questions, or, I just think if we can get out in the community a little bit more and kind of continue the conversations, I think that we've started now as part of the referendum, I think it might be helpful.
Yeah, no, I'm always open to engage with community members that have questions. Usually get very good response, some candid and direct, and, explain some of the nuances of government, finances, school district finances.
I just think there's always this understanding, we have $100 million budget. Oh, you guys have all that money. What are you doing with that money? And I think it's helpful to kind of fill in the blanks and explain to people what we're really doing for students. And also, I think it's important, given that what's coming, and we know it's coming eventually, that we are very clear about the challenges and that we're going to have to make some changes or accommodate to be solvent in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, it's super important. And I take this philosophy, we're not here to accumulate money in the bank. We're here to educate, we're educational services, that's how we're rated, how well we're doing that. So it's always a fine line between, being fiscally prudent, but at the same time, maximizing, what we're, the education that we're giving to our students. So it's always a challenge.
Anyone else? Any questions? All right, so moving on now, we have the superintendent recommends job description for the assistant superintendent of student services, and then public comment. And there's no public comment tonight, just because Matt did such a great job. There's no questions. So moving on now to the consent vote. Can I get a motion? Ari, second. Debbie?
Daphne Kendall,
Yes.
Beth Barron,
Yes.
Adam Bierman,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Mara Franceschi,
Yes.
Eleanor Hubbard,
Yes.
Susan Cantor,
Yes.
Ari Mizell,
Yes.
Chris Santarpio,
Yes.
Catherine Lara.
Yes.
Consent agenda passes.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. Just a reminder, our next meeting is February 11th. Next week. And then our meeting after that is March 18th. So lots of meetings and then no meetings. Can I please get a motion to adjourn? Beth, second. Chris? All in favor? All right, good night.